In 1971, a 16-year-old kid would leave his abusive foster home and live on the street for almost 7 years. This would later inspire the now grown Richard Wagamese to write The Ragged Company, a story about 4 homeless friends who come across a large amount of money. This would become a sort of Canadian classic to those who read it, with some users saying that it demonstrates the bitterness of truth. When we read Ragged Company, we saw how Amelia lost a home to a fire and never recovered, and how a car crash destroyed Timber's life.
The death of Amelia's parents spiraled into years of her drinking and living on the street. Those cheap government houses were dry as tinder, heated by one central stove that threw an ember through the grate one night and burned our house to the ground. This quote from Amelia's personal story shows how one spark can displace the delicate balance of financial stability and put a blameless person on the street.
It's not only about financial stability either. Timber, aka Jonas, in the book was relatively financially stable, with a house and a business, and yet, to quote Timber himself, then came Cameron Gracie. A man under the influence of alcohol crashed his car into Timber's wife, Sylvian. Neither Timber nor Sylvian had any choice in that accident, yet it led to the drainage of their pockets and the eventual unhoused Timber, not to mention the irreversible damage to Sylvian's mind. Even a financially stable household was leveled by something that the household had no influence on.
The book shows how easily someone who's just going over a rough patch in their life can lose everything. Even when they don't make any mistakes, people end up unhoused. But why? Why are more than 60,000 people without homes in Canada? And most importantly, what are the strategies that our cities' governments are using in aid of stopping it?
There have been many different strategies in the war against homelessness in Canada. But we have found 2 main approaches, housing first and an imposition strategy. Here in Calgary, Alberta, our objective against homelessness is what we call housing first. This is primarily making it easier for people to get off the street, and more importantly, making it more difficult for people to end up there in the first place. The main policy of this strategy, as you might have guessed, is making housing more accessible and affordable through investments, funding, and taxing policies, such as putting tax exemptions on not-for-profit housing businesses. The housing first strategy is not so much about helping the homeless when they are unhomed, but to help the poor and unstable get stability and begin to build wealth. Stop it before it happens. Not only is the home first strategy good in theory, it's also proven in practice. Other than Calgary, Medicine Hat has also utilized the policy, and now, out of just over 68,000 people, only a reported 70 people experienced homelessness, and there was not one reported case of unsheltered homelessness. Does Medicine Hat do anything crazy to do it? No. It just builds houses and optimizes the current housing situation so it accommodates the needs of its citizens. The vacancy rate of Medicine Hat across all housing types is only 1.1%. For context, Toronto is at 4.2% and Calgary is at 7.4%. So, while you would be remiss to say that homelessness is cured in Medicine Hat, you'd be right in stating that the housing first strategy has worked there. In Calgary, we have had muted success compared to our friends in the Southeast. Just recently, in 2024, did Calgary launch the initiative, but we have been making good progress. From approving tens of thousands of home permits to building non-market homes, the city has spearheaded the homelessness crisis, and, on the same coin, the housing market crisis. Calgary still has much to do. Homelessness population is still high, but the rate has stabilized, an early sign that the city has laid the groundwork for some real, long-lasting progress.
An imposition strategy against homelessness includes criminalizing homelessness and dismantling encampments. Usually, fire departments deem them fire hazards, giving the government the green light to clear the space. Cities often use police to ensure residents are evicted, and city maintenance crews are brought in to clear debris and restore landscaping when needed. This approach tries to pressure people into stable housing, but it rarely works on its own and is typically combined with other strategies. Montreal is a prominent example of a city that has used this strategy, clearing 110 encampments between January and May of 2024. Old and coercive policies, like evictions, are akin to playing whack-a-mole, forcing people out of one area only to have them pitch a tent down the street, or into a spot far from public view where they can't receive aid if they are in trouble. James Hughes, President and CEO of Old Brewery Mission, Montreal. The success of Montreal's strategy was examined by the Montreal's Public Consultation Office. They found an approximate 50% increase in visible homelessness from 2018 to 2022 using an imposition strategy, suggesting that this strategy merely pushes the problem around rather than solving it. Through our research, we found that more cities implement crisis-driven imposition approaches rather than full imposition strategies. As a result, our research focus shifted from enforcement strategies to strategies that respond with enforcement only once the problem escalates into an emergency. Toronto claims to prioritize housing first initiatives, but a look at the stats may prove otherwise. In 2021, Toronto released their Homelessness Solutions Service Plan that pledged to make homelessness, quote, rare, brief, and non-recurring. Just 3 years later, the number of residents without permanent housing had doubled. Shelters continued to consistently be filled to capacity each night, with demand exceeding availability. The systemic failures to address the problem pushed Toronto City Council to declare a homelessness emergency in May 2023, which is still active today. Critics would argue that Toronto uses a crisis-driven imposition strategy, despite the City Council's insistence that they are pushing for housing first. Governments often claim to be using a statistics-backed, correct approach in order to convince the public that they are pursuing the most optimal solution. However, budget restraints may influence a government to choose a short-term solution rather than investing for the long term. While Toronto may be saving money now, the cost of clearing encampments quickly adds up. In September 2021, $2 million were spent to clear just 3 encampments in Toronto. Encampment residents want permanent housing but are offered only temporary shelter. Of course, permanent housing for roughly 15,000 people is an enormous upfront cost, but we are not advocating for this issue to be fixed instantly in its entirety. You need to walk before you can run, or in this case, you need to stop running backwards before you can start to make forward progress. If Toronto continues to promise but not deliver, it should come as no surprise that homelessness continues to increase.
Doing research on Canadian homelessness policies helped us understand Ragged Company on a deeper level. Through our research in the Housing First initiative, we have discovered that its effectiveness is rooted in the fact that it gives people a layer of stability, which helps them stay off the street.
Characters in the novel never received aid to get back on their feet permanently because they lived in a city which utilized a crisis-driven strategy, likely Toronto. Seeing how some cities attack the problem rather than attempt to find solutions allowed us to understand how some of the injustices described in the novel came to be.
A delivery truck backed up that alley first thing in the morning and ran right over his head. The Square Johns, all tish-tosh over the stories in the news, say how sad and pitiful it is, how something should be done. But 5 minutes later they forget, because they don't really give a f*** and they don't have to.
Our research made it clear that Wagamese wasn't just making up individual stories, but describing the human impact of systems.
The truth is that we're in a position of true privilege. We write about homelessness, problems from the comforts of shelter, without a real understanding of the harsh realities.
The book, from our point of view, was a journey of appreciation more than anything else. It's easy to say that the homeless are lazy drug addicts that are undeserving of help, but it's hard to confront them. We avert our eyes when we see the horrors. We move past it and shove it to the back of our minds.
When we are exposed, wholly and candidly, to our privilege, we are forced, in some way, to find out why it's happening.
Our research helped us better understand both the novel and the issue of homelessness.
We found that the reason Housing First is successful is that it provides people with a greater stability than what we see in Ragged Company.
We also learned why crisis-driven enforcement results in the kind of displacement shown in the book. Researching the real strategies used in Canadian cities helped us see the characters not just as fictional exceptions, but as reflections of an ongoing national issue.